Okay, thank you everybody. My name is Per Inge, that's my first name, believe it or not. I come from Norway, and in Norway it's not uncommon that we have a double first name, and I'm one of them. So my first name is Per Inge, and my last name is Andresen. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and who I work for in a later presentation tomorrow, because I think there may be more time for that tomorrow. So right now I'll just get straight to this introduction, which is about when you have international research projects, what does that really mean when you're going to assist in managing and administrating these projects, with a focus on the financial support, but not just that. Also saying something about how you, when you deal with financial administrative tasks, you also have to think of the bigger picture and the context that you work with and the people that you collaborate with. So, let's see, sorry. So what I would like to propose here is a framework where we could put labels on things and try to see how things fit together. And it's not the final answer, but it's a suggestion of how we could structure our thinking, our way around what it means to manage international research projects. And I'm going then to say something about what I believe are the needs of the financial support staff, and then ask you what your thoughts are on that at the end. And please interrupt at any time if you have any questions or anything you'd like to comment on. Yeah, so about the framework. One question that we could ask is, how are research projects different from other projects? Some of you may have studied or practiced project management. And if you've studied it, you may have studied project management from the point of view of other different kinds of projects, not necessarily research projects. So I'll try to say something about what makes managing research projects different. And also I'll frame that within what we call the project lifecycle. Also I'll try to say something about how project management is different from general management in an organization. Finally, a few words about the institutional context that we all work in, and also about cross-cultural communication. That sounds about right for 45 minutes? Yeah? Okay. We'll try to, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button here. We'll try to get through that, but also please interrupt. So when you look at project management versus general management, what are some of the differences? When you look at management of an organization, there is the assumption that we're going to exist forever and we're going to do this thing as long as we can look into the future. We see no end at the end of the tunnel for what we're doing in a general sense when we manage organizations. Projects, they have a start and an end. And that's the context that you work in from the start. You know it normally when you start. You also know when the end is. And that is the goal that you have in mind and in focus when you set up the management of this activity of the project. Organizations, even public ones often, they have short and long-term growth goals. In public organizations, you might define growth in a different sense than profit or economic growth, but they often also have their own goals. In private organizations, it's easier to find the definition of the long-term, short-term and long-term growth goals. The goals in projects are totally different generally. It's not about obtaining an organizational objective of growth. It's about performing certain activities and achieving certain deliverables. And they're not always very clearly defined, but they tend to be very clearly defined. And particularly in Horizon 2020 projects, which is going to be our primary focus here, the tasks and the deliverables and the goals are supposed to be clearly defined. And that, again, is what you work towards. Organizations, they generally have annual planning cycles and annual reporting cycles. Projects have their own, which are independent of the annual cycle of the organization. And then you have to match these different cycles and get them to work together. In organization, when you look at personal relationships in organizations, they tend to be quite long-term, and you get to know different aspects of your colleagues, not just related to what you do, but also because you meet them socially at work, and you get to know the people you work with from very many different angles. When you meet people in projects, these relationships tend to be very short-term and very focused. Let's get the job done, basically. Of course, in Horizon 2020 projects, which are, most of them are consortia with networks, they have their kickoff meetings when they try to get to know each other, also socially, but it's still, there's still a limit as to how many aspects of different people you could get to know during a two-day meeting, and many of you who are here may not even be present at those meetings. So again, in projects, our relationships tend to be more down to just certain aspects and not very multifaceted, basically, and also short-term. The decision-making structure is different. Organizations, they tend to, they're one single legal body. So there's never any doubt who is the formal head of the organization and who has the formal decision-making power. Of course, you may have informal decision-making structures which you can't read out of the organizational chart, but the formal decision-making power is always known to everybody in the organization. And these structures tend to last for a long time, over years. In projects, the decision-making structure is on an ad hoc basis. And it's limited to this one activity, this one project. But you may have challenges in the fact that in Horizon 2020 projects, most of them, not all, but most of them are, as I said, involve several partners in several countries. And they have their own internal decision-making structure, which also comes into play when getting these projects managed. And then you have a decision-making structure between the partners in a consortium, and you also have to manage that and know how to operate and use that structure. And you have to match your organization's decision-making structure with that of the project. And sometimes when Horizon 2020 project consortium is going to make a decision, it may take quite a long time because you have to get all these structures to work together. And you also have to get approvals with the European Commission in addition to that. So then you have a lot of different players to keep in mind when decisions need to be made in a Horizon 2020 project consortium. Any questions or comments to this? I use the word project life cycle. It's a widely used term, and you may define it in different stages. In the field of colleagues across Europe who do research administration and who work as research advisors or research administrators, particularly in universities and research institutes, they often use the term pre-award and post-award. And I think it's a term that comes out of Britain, but it's also used in many other countries. And the line between pre-award and post-award goes where you have a grant. In Horizon 2020, that's stage. When the grant agreement is signed, that's when you switch from pre-award to post-award. But the project lifecycle, you could say, in the context of research projects, we could use the stages that I put up here as one suggestion. You have the mapping of funding opportunities, where research advisors look for calls in Horizon 2020, or even on the draft work programs, and try to match those opportunities to researchers in their organization. And if you're proactive, you try to lobby, although you don't use that word, the Euro Commission to change the work program to find something there that your professor or your researcher can then be a good candidate for to win that call, basically. But later on, when a work program is published, you just have to take the work program as is and still map the opportunities there to the researchers in your organization. So that's the mapping of funding opportunity stage. So that's even, you could say it's pre-award, if you like to even distinguish it further. But in this setting here, I've included it in the pre-award stage. Then we have the proposal stage and the grant preparation stage. When those stages are done, you submitted the proposal, or you developed the proposal, submitted the proposal, it's been selected for grant preparation, and the grant preparation stage is finished. That's when you switch to the post-award stage. That's when the project starts. And you are into the implementation stage of the project. That runs for a few years, typically 2 to 5 years in Horizon 2020. And at the end, there is something that should happen but doesn't often happen, or it doesn't happen as often as it should. It's what I call an evaluation stage. What can we learn from this project to use in future projects? You might call it, you could use a different word for it. Somebody might perhaps call it debriefing. But the purpose is to have a systematic process and a procedure to make sure that every project we do, we ask the question, what can we learn from it? So that's, you could also present this project life cycle in a linear model. What we looked at first was a cyclical model. It's often easier to illustrate things and link them to this project life cycle if we use a linear presentation. So that's why I show it here, and I'll use this later on as a point of reference. We have the same stages, just presented in a different way. Now, a few words about what makes research projects different from other projects. Could be like developing software for a software company. A lot of the project management literature is linked to that kind of a business, to the software companies that produce new software. It could be engineering companies that build bridges or houses or shopping malls or oil platforms in the ocean, whatever. Those are what we could call business projects. A business project could perhaps also be to develop a whole new business area, but that would be quite complex. In business projects, you generally have very clear, concrete goals. They're very focused on results all the way. And the results are, it's the results that matter more than anything. It's not it's not really important how we get there as long as we get there, if we're talking about a business project. For that reason, in many business projects, there are a lot of changes in the plan along the way. least if you have good monitoring of your project. As soon as you see something that threatens your results, you adapt the plan to make sure that you get the results that you wanted. That's different from a research project, I would argue. In a research project, although you are supposed to submit certain deliverables to the Commission in a Horizon 2020 project, the primary purpose of the project is the research more than the result, I would argue. Okay. People would argue with me on this, and it depends on what kind of Horizon 20 project you're discussing, perhaps. But if you compare a Horizon 2020 project to a business project, I would still argue that they're different a difference in this regard. A lot of people disagree with me on this, or yeah, I'm off the mark. Nobody wants to argue against this. Okay, maybe at lunch, right? Okay. Just a minute, I'll have to try to fix this. Okay, we'll get back to where we were. But for the same reason, I would argue that in research projects, you don't change your plans as much as you would in a business project. The plan is more stable, and if unexpected things happen, it takes more for you to change the plan. But it's like if some of you know Marie Curie projects, Marie Sklodowska reactions in Horizon 2020, a change that would definitely mean that you will have to change your plan is if you can't recruit a PhD as early as you planned, and the PhD starts later than you planned, then you also have to change the plan. But that's quite straightforward. Now, within this project life cycle, as a financial administrator and a financial manager, what are the methods that one could use in the different stages? These are some of my suggestions. If we look at the initial stage, mapping of funding opportunities, one method or one kind of approach that we could develop our own ways of doing is to analyze the funding rules for different funding programs. And if your organization has a policy that, okay, we'll take the funding rules into consideration when we decide what to apply for, then it would make sense to develop analytical methods for that purpose. And also to analyze the documentation requirements. I could give you an example. I come from Norway. And there is something called the EEA grants. It's an abbreviation for European Economic Area. Generally, what happens there is that it's a bilateral project collaboration between one of the countries, the EU 13, the new member states in the EU, mostly Eastern Europe, also Portugal and Malta. So it's a bilateral project collaboration between a partner in one of those countries and Norway, basically. We have struggled a lot, and I've talked to colleagues from Eastern Europe who say the same thing about the documentation requirements when you have to report, submit financial reports for EEA grants. And they are a source of a lot of frustration. So that's an example where I, as a financial advisor at my university, would say, okay, if you're going to apply for EEA grants, at least know to be prepared for that kind of reporting task, because it's huge, basically. And then it's up to you if you want to apply for it or not, but at least know what to expect. So that's one example. That's for when you map different programs, what are we going to apply for? For the next stage, the proposal stage, The methods that I would argue are relevant are you have to identify and understand what are the relevant costs in your organization. So for this kind of program with this kind of project, what are the costs that would occur in your organization? And then you have to, if this is new for your organization, you've never done this kind of project before, you have to do calculations on how these costs add up to the whole project budget and to, later on when you report. Then once you've identified each and every cost item, you've done the calculations, then you produce the budget for the proposal stage. I could give you an example, but then, okay, I'll give you just one example, and then we'll get further into it later on in later presentations. Personnel cost is something that you always have in research projects. You can never do research without people. And what you have to do there is to figure out, with the rules of Horizon 2020, how do we calculate our personnel costs? And if this is a new kind of program for your organization, what you need to know is that you can probably not just use your normal calculations as they have been in the past and then submit on that basis. You have to study the rules of Horizon 2020 and then create new calculations for that purpose when you produce the budget. Just give you one example of what we were talking about in this stage. What should happen in the proposal stage is that it's not enough to just to produce one budget and be done with it. With good planning, you'll have to go back and forth a few times. You have a draft of the budget, and then the professor and the coordinator, they discuss the plan that you write in the proposal, and okay, you see that this budget does not fit our plan, or actually this budget became too expensive, or actually we could apply for more. So then you adjust the plan and you adjust the budget, and that may happen 2 or 3 times, maybe even more. So that's why you have a few iterations of rebudgeting and producing new draft budgets before you're done. So it's important then as a financial support staff to work with the researcher together as a team so that you get the right budget for the proposal. And something that you could live with if you get the project, so that actually you get your costs funded the way you expected it. Any comments? No? Too much in one go? Ready for some more? Okay. Next stage, grant preparation stage. The proposal has been submitted, and the European Commission and the evaluators have said, yes, this is a good proposal, we like to fund it. Then there are things you have to do then when you get that invitation before you actually have a signed grant agreement. We'll get into details about that later on. But as a financial manager, what you should do then is take a look at the budget that is part of this draft grant agreement and check, okay, have I seen this budget before? Was I involved in putting together this budget in the proposal stage, or is this something I've never seen before? If it's unknown, you should recalculate the budget to make sure that this is not a problem to your organization. And you might have to, in this stage, the Commission sometimes wants more information on certain parts of the budget before they are willing to sign the grant agreement. So you might have to provide more information. It's not a secret that in some cases people are rushed for time at the proposal stage, so they just throw in some numbers in the budget and sort of thinking of numbers and not doing very detailed calculations. And they call it, they give it a name that's quite vague. They call it lab costs, for instance, or consumables or travel without detail. And the Commission would perhaps at this stage ask for more details to make sure that this makes sense, this budget item. And if you can't explain it, maybe they'll pull it out before you sign the grant agreement. So you need to provide good explanations. And together, again, you need to do it together with the researcher in many cases. Yeah. Well, it's not a negotiation. And when we moved from FP7 to Horizon 2020, the Commission was very explicit in its language because in FP7 it was called a negotiation phase. But in Horizon 2020 they consciously changed the word. They now call it grant preparation stage. And they say in their official documents that you have to take the proposal and the budget as is without any changes. But still, it happens that the Commission, the project officer, will ask questions about certain part of the budget. And there is a risk that if you don't have a good explanation, they will take that out of the budget. Because as when you're invited to this stage, the grant preparation stage, the Commission sends a letter to the coordinator and they tell the coordinator to distribute this letter to all the partners. And they say that this letter is not a promise that you will get this funding. They use other words, but that's what they say. And also another aspect of this is that the amount is the maximum that you can get. But there's no guarantee that you will get it, basically. But what is different from FP7 is that you cannot start really changing the budget, but you can explain it. And if you don't have good reasons that make sense, they can pull it out. But you can't move it around and put it somewhere else, except if you put it in the wrong category. Then they might tell you to move it from this category to that category in the budget without changing it. Any other questions? No? Yeah, so, and then, so this was one aspect of explaining the budget externally, explaining it to the Commission. You also, if you are the coordinator, there might be a need to explain the budget to the rest of the consortium. So that's external budget explanation. But you also have to explain this budget internally in your organization. In many organizations, like my own, I'm from a public university. In my university, it's the head of department where the ownership of a project is based. So the head of department of physics or chemistry or political science, sociology, whichever department, has, we as financial advisors or in the financial support team, we have to explain what this budget means to the head of department. And the head of department has to give his or her approval. Because generally, these projects mean a certain amount of own funding. Most of these projects, you will never get all of your true actual costs 100% funded, even though the funding rate officially is 100%. The main reason for that is the indirect costs, which is defined by universal rate in Horizon 2020, and which is most likely different from your own, whatever it is. So it needs to be explained internally, the budget. Okay, if we're done with the grant preparation stage, then we get into the implementation stage of the project. And this is when the project starts. And now different methods and skills and tasks come into play. Sorry. Okay. The first is that, or maybe the order might be different, but one task is that the project has to be set up in your organization's electronic systems, accounting system, maybe a payroll system, maybe procurement system, depending on what electronic systems your organizations use for the financial management. And you have to set up the accounting structure for your project. That may vary, but you should at least have a clear identifier for your projects, so that every cost that you charge the project can be linked to that identifier as a very minimum. And during the implementation, of course, there is the daily accounting of costs for this project, using timesheets and the booking of invoices and so on and so on, and monitoring and control. So as a financial support person, when the project is running, you should assist in monitoring and control of the project. And it should be done on a regular basis and not leave it till the end and then discover whatever went wrong, if something went wrong. So it should be done, and you should agree internally on what kind of cycle this should happen, how frequently it should be done. There's a term here, deviation management. It means what do we do with unexpected events, deviations from the plan, deviations from the budget, costs that are different from the budget, activities that are different from the plan. That's what I would call deviation management. We should have a systematic method and procedure to manage deviations, and not just do it spontaneously on an ad hoc basis, but be systematic about it and be proactive. Catch the deviations as early as possible before it's too late to do something about them, basically. And we also have a task, a method, which we could sum up in the category reporting. You will have internal reporting within your organization, you will have reporting in a consortium of partners, and you will have reporting to the EU. Lots of fun there for those who enjoy the financial reporting. Okay, now the project has been through the implementation stage, and we're getting to the end, and this is where we should ask ourselves, what can we learn from this project? What I call the evaluation phase. Then we could develop a set of tools of financial analysis of the costs and the funding and also deviations that happen in this project. Do we see a pattern of deviations that keep reoccurring in one project after another? We've had 5 projects now, and the same thing happened in every 5 of these projects. This is something we can learn from that for the future, for instance. We should also evaluate our procedures that we are responsible for in the financial support service. Do we have procedures that fit the purpose and that are efficient and are goal effective, that are suited to the purpose that they're intended for? Or should we change our procedures? Are they unnecessarily detailed or cumbersome, or are they too easy and too relaxed? And ask those questions. And we should also look at the tools that we use. Do they make sense? Or do we need to develop some new tools or buy new software or get rid of some tools that we use that we don't have any benefit from, and so on? Those are questions that we should ask so that we learn from these projects. So those are the methods. And then a few words about tools that we could use for these purposes. I have not put up a tool for the first stage here, the mapping of funding opportunities. For the proposal stage, what we should have, and if we don't have it, we should develop it. If we start working on proposals for Horizon 2020, we should develop our own cost calculation templates, because we most likely you have a cost structure and an accounting structure internally, which is different from the cost categories that Horizon 2020 uses. So it would be useful if you develop a template that you could use for every proposal, where you sort of linked your internal cost structure to the cost table that the Commission wants. That may take some work to do to produce the first time, but once you've produced it, you could just fine-tune it, and the next times you use it would be much more efficient. And then also it would be useful to have your own tool where you transfer data from your internal cost structure to the Commission's template. And hopefully as automatic as possible without any manual editing would be the best. And use or develop various budget templates for different programs within Horizon 2020. Again, to save time in the future. So that's for the proposal stage. In the grant preparation stage, again, you should use the same tool that you had for the proposal stage to map the cost structure to the Commission's budget table. And you should have a checklist. Questions that you always make sure that you ask at this stage, as a way of validating that this budget is not a problem for your organization. So produce a checklist and just go through it every time there is a new grant preparation stage. So that is for the grant preparation stage. Any questions? For the implementation stage, again, I would recommend a template for that purpose as well. A template for the project structure that you are going to create in your electronic system. You do have an accounting system. Maybe you don't have a project accounting system. But whatever system you have a template for setting up the internal project structure in your system. And make sure that you have the necessary tags or identifiers for your structure, so that all the costs can be charged to the right project. I'll give you a word package, which is essential in not all of Horizon 2020, but you don't have them necessarily in Marie's career actions, but you have them in the research and innovation actions. You have them in the innovation actions. You have them in the coordination and support actions. You have work packages. And generally the Commission wants you to report how many hours or person months was done in each work package. So I would clearly recommend that you also have identifiers on the work package level in your system. What we do in our university is we have a project accounting software or system, and we create sub-projects for each work package, in our case. You might do it differently, but some kind of identifier for that level. So have a template for that, and develop a set of internal accounting guidelines to be used by the staff that is involved in accounting, so that they know how to do things with invoices, with timesheets, with travel claims, and so on. Develop a template for project monitoring, like an Excel tool where you could pull out data from your financial system, your accounting system, have a, for instance, like an Excel spreadsheet where the data from the accounting system goes in, and then you treat and analyze the data in your tool, and you have certain parameters that you look for, particularly when you monitor how the project is running. Like, yeah, I think I'll show you examples later on to get more into detail about that. You need, in your system, a report generator. That depends on your software and your system. But some kind of report generator, and it would be useful if you could either you could yourself or you could go to someone who could create a report that fits your purpose, your kind of project, so that you could get a report that gives you data on the format that is relevant for Horizon 2020, and that you can watch those and look for deviations as the project is running. And you should have a template which makes it as automatic as possible for you to get data out of your accounting system and into a format that is compatible with what the Commission wants, so that you don't have to do all of it manually, basically. So those were for the implementation stage. For the evaluation stage, my suggestions are more generic, because it depends on what you want to see, what you can learn from. So a report generator would be useful. If you have a system where you could create, where you have been trained to create your own reports in the system, pulling things, parameters, data sets out of the system into your own report format, that would be useful for you, because then you could generate reports that match what you're looking for. And also templates for that purpose. Any questions? This is all self-evident, and you're all doing it, right? Nothing new here. Good. Yeah, these are the what I believe are competences that are that could be valuable for these purposes. Looking at the watch, maybe, but I will not say anything today about the first stage, of the mapping of funding opportunities. So I will go to the proposal stage. Basically, the more knowledge you have of the different programs, the better. The better you are equipped to provide advice on what the financial implications are of participating in projects in these different programs, because they are different. Also, to have a good knowledge in the way your organization, the principles that your organization uses in cost calculations. Because there are rules in Horizon 2020 that are not necessarily the same as the ones that you use. Last year, or actually about a year and a half ago, or closer to 2 years now perhaps, the Commission changed one piece of rule in the guidelines for Horizon 2020. It goes under the name internally invoiced costs. The rules became more open and allowed more than in the beginning of Horizon 2020. But still, if you're going to qualify for costs being accepted in that category, you have to understand what principles the Commission wants you to use and whether your organization follows those principles or not. So to understand cost calculation principles is important. And also your internal cost calculation procedures. For instance, how do you calculate lab costs? And what are the methods, what are the components that go into that, and to what extent are things really measured and in real data, or to what extent are people just guessing or estimating? Also, having skills in project budgeting would be useful. For the grant preparation stage, the cost calculation analysis again is also relevant here, and also budget analysis to analyze the budget and what it means for your organization. In the implementation stage, you should know all of your financial systems that are used, how they operate, so that you know where is data generated and how does it travel from one system to the other and so on, and how does it show up in your report at the end. You should have good general accounting skills, and it would be useful to have project accounting skills. And also skills in financial monitoring and of the different reporting forms that are used by the Commission and in your systems. And in the evaluation stage, when it comes to learning from all the projects that your organization has completed, it's a matter of more general analytical skills that are relevant. I see that we're getting close to the end of our time slot. So maybe I'll try to run more quickly through this slide here and the next one. This is a slide about organizational and institutional context. When you are part of a European consortium in a research project, it is useful to understand your organizational and institutional context and how it compares to the context of other partners. Don't just assume that the context is the same for all the other partners as it is at home in your organization. Try to develop an understanding and a knowledge of, okay, there are different kinds of institutions and organizations part of our consortium, and they're not all the same. They don't all operate in the same way. And some of the parameters that I believe are relevant in that kind of analysis is their ownership. Are they publicly or privately owned? That's one difference. That has implications for how decisions are made, for instance, and how things operate. It's the goal. Is this a for-profit organization, which is a partner in your consortium, or is it one that is driven by generating knowledge, like a university? The structure, is it a hierarchical structure or more autonomous, the decision-making structure in this organization? If you have a newly started SME, they're not likely to have the same hierarchical organizational structure as a big university. And decisions are probably made in a more autonomous and spontaneous way than a newly started SME, for instance. The governance, I'm not sure if I should explain the word governance, how decisions are made, and is a brief way of explaining it. Is the governance open? That's transparent. or opaque, which means it's hard to see, it's foggy, and it's not really clear who are making decisions here and how decisions are made and what decisions are made based on. That's what I would call opaque governance. And it's impossible for people to really understand who made this decision and why did they make it and what did they base this decision on. That's the opposite of transparent. And organizations are different in that way as well. Regulations may be different. They may be extremely detailed, explaining absolutely everything, how we do things in our organization, or they may be very short and vague and leaving everything up to you. Be aware of those differences when you're collaborating in international research projects. And procedures, they may be clear, or they may be, okay, we'll have to interpret this the way we like, or as best we can. A couple of words about, be aware of this word, cross-cultural communication. I'm not here to teach you cross-cultural communication, that's not my skill, but be aware of it and respect it. And have it in the back of your mind that this is also something that matters, to get people to work together. This is also the case within Europe, also within countries. You have cultures, you have professional cultures. Different professions have different cultures, you might argue. People come with their own set of values and also values that are promoted in their organization. We all have stereotypes, even though we don't like to admit it. And we should understand and be aware of or ask ourselves about our own stereotypes and also expect others to have stereotypes. As far as communication is concerned, try to be as clear as you can and be patient and be flexible. And if you get a sense that another person that you're communicating with does not really understand what you're trying to say, try to explain it in a different way and not just repeat yourself. But be as clear as you can and be patient. And by flexible, I mean try different approaches. Perception, we perceive things differently. And don't expect everybody else to perceive things the way you do. That's something we should all remember. Context matters a lot when we collaborate, and things work in one context but not in another. Things are perceived differently in different contexts and so on. We all have an institutional background which affects the way we think and operate, and we have the language matter as well. So I think we're approaching the end. These are some suggestions. Let's try to sum up what we've been through so far. It is useful for you when you work in the financial support to know the financial rules of the relevant funding programs. It's useful to get training in calculation of budgets. It's useful to get training in project accounting. And perhaps even if your organization doesn't have a dedicated project accounting system, it could be useful to get training in what that is about, and then you could try to discuss at home how it could be solved in your organization without a dedicated project accounting system. Get knowledgeable about financial management terminology would be useful. Learn how to collaborate with people who are not in finance. like with researchers, for instance, and get some exposure to different cultures and experience how it is to collaborate across cultures. Those were my suggestions. I don't know how we're doing for time, whether we should have any, whether there's room for any discussion now, but should we move on, or? Are there any comments or anything that you think does not make sense? Yeah. It's hard for me to count them, because we have different roles and different functions in different parts of the organization, and I don't think I even have the complete picture of them. My university has about 8,000 employees. I was planning to say a little bit more tomorrow about my university. It has about 8,000 employees, about 40,000 students, 8 faculties, between 50 and 60 departments, and research advisors, which are more in the mapping of opportunities stage and the pre-proposal stage, or proposal stage. They are working, they're employed on the faculty level, and in a few cases even on the department level. So I could say that each of our 8 faculties has 1 or 2 people who work with those tasks, but then there are a few departments that have their own. Some of these people, they're not just pre-award, but they're also involved in post-award. But if we bring that into the picture, there are a lot of other people who also work post-award. And then my university has a lot of these targeted focus efforts. They have something called the golden groups, where the rector gives funding to a team of researchers in a specific dedicated area to really work hard to get international funding, for instance. And then they are given a person, or they get half of the salary for a person to manage that office, funded by the rector, and then you could count those people as well. So it's hard to give a clear number, but it's several dozen, I would say, in a university of 8,000 employees. Yeah. Yeah, any other questions, comments? Time for next topic. Thank you.